Roll call, I am here. Brants is here. Sanchez is here. Rosamond is here. Bender is here. I'm going to make a motion to approve the agenda.
I second it.
Motion Sanchez seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All ayes. Motion passes. Members of the public may address the board on items within the jurisdiction of the board by submitting the presentation required request to the secretary. Members of the public are strongly urged not to mention personnel by name and are reminded that they are not immune from legal action if personnel are there. The board may limit each speaker to 3 minutes and a total of 20 minutes per topic. As required by state law, comments during the special meeting may address only specific listed items on the agenda and no other matters. We'll now have the budget status from Jimmy Henderson and Mr. Payne.
Okay, thank you. You have a copy on your, well, first of all, good evening, members of the board. You have a copy of the presentation at your place, or you may turn and watch the screen, whatever you prefer. As Board President Gutierrez mentioned, my name is Jamie Henderson. I'm the Kern County Superintendent of Schools. I've spent probably 40-some odd years in public education in Kern County. Teacher, principal, school district superintendent, and then went to work for the Kern County Superintendent of Schools office as a management consultant. I have 11 school districts in this county that I am the management consultant for. I've worked with a number of boards with board trainings. I was asked by Dr. Mary Barlow to be the fiscal advisor when the agreement was struck with Southern Kern. Jeff Payne, who will come up in a little bit, is the fiscal expert. So, let me kind of launch into this. I'll give you a little overview first of AB 1200. Assembly Bill 1200 was passed in 1991 by the California State Assembly. The purpose of AB 1200 was to make sure that school districts maintain their solvency in fiscally, that they don't run into debt and have fiscal problems. So it cast the county offices into some roles that this legislation required. So for the Kern County Superintendent of Schools office, as well as the offices in the other 57 counties, our role is very simple. There are 47 school districts in Kern County. So we review and approve the budgets that you adopt. We also look at your first and second interim reports, which is December and April. Those are kind of a snapshot you take at that time, and you can kind of figure out, hey, how are we dealing with this budget? Are we spending about what we said we were? Are our costs about what they were? And it's just a very good safeguard for districts to have. And we review that as well. Then the County Office of Ed must assess solvency for the current and 2 subsequent years. And you're either going to get a positive certification, a qualified certification, or a negative certification. Southern Kern finds itself with a negative certification in the current year and the following year. Part of the as we look around the state of California, there are only 3 districts that are negatively qualified or have a negative certification. So we also review collective bargaining agreements because there are costs associated with those. And if you happen to have any non-voter approved debt, but that's only for qualified districts, and you have a negative certification. So that doesn't apply to you, and you don't have any non-voter approved debt at this time. What can happen under a negative certification? So we've talked about this before, but I think a very quick review would be good. First of all, you are assigned a fiscal expert. That is Jeff Payne from our office. Jeff has a long history. He's worked in school districts with budgets, and he works for Kern County Superintendent of Schools. He has a number of districts assigned to him where he reviews their budgets and their interim reports and works with their business people to make sure things are happening the way they should. So he has been assigned as your fiscal expert. He will work with your business office. He will come out, he will look at your budget, he will look at the spending, as I do, and make sure that things are proceeding in a manner to get you out of this negative certification. You also have a fiscal recovery plan in consultation with our office. So you have this plan in place, and it has been reviewed by our office, and we're moving forward on that. You're also assigned a fiscal advisor, okay? I'm the fiscal advisor. He's the fiscal expert, I'm the advisor. We develop and impose a budget in consultation with the district and the California Department of Ed, which has already been done. The last item, the stay and rescind action of the board that is inconsistent with fiscal recovery. As the fiscal advisor, I have by law stay and rescind power. If, when I review your agendas, if I see something on the agenda that is a potential action item and it would have a negative impact or it's not consistent with you making a fiscal recovery, then I pull it from the agenda and it does not come back. So that's what stay and rescind is. Okay. Additionally, if you were in state receivership, and I have to be real candid about this, you've got tough decisions to make. Our county superintendent met with your board, and you guys signed an agreement that rather than go into state receivership, you would have a fiscal expert and fiscal advisor assigned, and you would have a fiscal recovery plan, and the county would lend you money to meet your obligations. Okay. If, in the opinion of the county, sufficient action is not taking place, then the county office would have to step away, which they would do, and you would be referred to the state. So what happens in state receivership? Well, you have to get a loan from the state. That's different than getting a loan from Kern County Superintendent of Schools. It's going to cost you more. There has to be legislation supported by your local representative, and it requires a 2/3 vote in each house of the legislature, because basically the state is taking you over, which means they're taking on your bills and all those other kinds of things. And it requires the governor's signature, and it can be a slow process. It can take 4 to 6 months. Well, when you are in a negative certification, you don't necessarily have 4 to 6 months. You have things that you need to be doing. So state receivership is not something that we want to see a district go into, and in fact, there has never been a district in Kern County to go into state receivership. The state loan results in the takeover of the district. The school board loses all authority and becomes advisory only. So you would still continue to have school board meetings, but they would only be advisory. You'd be taking no action. Superintendent is no longer employed because you have a state administrator, the bottom bullet, is assigned by the County Office of Education, and that individual assumes all powers of the board and the superintendent. The state administrator's role is to restore fiscal solvency as soon as possible. He or she develops a plan to reduce expenditures to the minimum level. All possible avenues for balancing and restructuring the budget are pursued. The state administrator cannot set aside contractual obligations, including vendor contracts or collective bargaining agreements, without negotiations. But the state administrator does have the authority to use either impasse or fact-finding to unilaterally impose changes to collective bargaining agreements if necessary for fiscal recovery. Okay, so that kind of, these are things that can happen with a state takeover. So your response is critical. What we have found with districts, Dr. Barlow, our county superintendent, worked for FICMAT and has been up and down the state working with districts that have had fiscal issues. So we have found that there are characteristics of districts that make a successful turnaround. First of all, they recognize they have a problem. Second of all, they don't mask the problem. Third, they take advantage of the fiscal expertise that is available to them. And fourth, they work collectively with oversight agencies. Your oversight agency is Kern County Superintendent of Schools. We have found that there are characteristics of districts that require severe measures. They deny they have a problem or the severity of the problem. They don't take sufficient action. They do not seek external assistance, and they do not cooperate with oversight agencies. What happens is that will set a district up for a state takeover in a heartbeat. So, avoiding the state loan and intervention process is in any district's benefit. It results in greater local control because the board still maintains control. The locally elected board maintains control. There's less outside intervention. Dr. Barlow was very adamant about wanting Kern County Superintendent of Schools staff to come work with you as opposed to people that live, up in Northern California or down in Southern California, somewhere where they're not familiar with the county, not familiar with the agencies, not familiar with the districts. Okay? So, with the long-term solution, working toward it, less outside intervention, better long-term outcomes for employees and the community. Not initially, there's some tough decisions that have to be made. But coming through on the other side, the long-term outcomes for employees and the community are much better. And therefore, better long-term outcomes for students. So I'm going to ask Jeff to come up now as a fiscal expert, and he has a few items he's going to go over.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, so we're on the right slide. Your district certified negative last March at second interim, and that was after our office had reviewed your second interim submission and came to the realization that you were fiscally insolvent. So you also certified negative when you adopted your budget in last June for July 1, 2018-19. You have then since had a fiscal report, which Eric brought to you at first interim in December. The 3 new board members, that was the first month you were in your seats. So we're here to kind of reinforce your fiscal situation so you understand where you're at. Reinforce some of the information Eric may have already given you, but we want to drive home the urgency of the situation you're in. So at first interim, there were staff reductions proposed. They came from your original fiscal recovery plan, but because your enrollment has leveled off, your funding is paid mostly on a per AD basis, so your funding is leveled off, and those staff reductions originally proposed back in June when you adopted your budget are no longer sufficient. So the district continues, in addition to that, to be cash insolvent. So as we advance to the next, you can see at first interim, your ending fund balance was projected to be, for the current year, negative $3.9 million. Your second year of your multi-year projection was a negative 3.2, and the third year, a negative $2 million. So you have to have a 3% reserve, positive reserve, to be certified as positive. That's the minimum to be positive. You can see right on the slide, you're not going to make it by 2021, and that was the agreement our office made with your board when we agreed to loan you cash. So, let's see. Okay, so as we advance to the next, let's talk about cash insolvency. The district, in addition to not being able to certify positive because of your ending fund balance, is also cash insolvent. And what that means in layman's terms is your district was bankrupt as of last May. So May 2018, your district could not make payroll, could not pay your employees, and our office stepped in and agreed to loan $697,000 to the district. In June, you couldn't make your payroll again, and we loaned you another $1.1 million. But none of that cash has been paid back at this time. You have not had the ability to pay it back. As we head into the current month we're in, you're going to be short on payroll again, both in the current month, February and March. So we are projecting that we're going to have to loan you another $500,000. And by the end of the year, we're going to have to loan you another $1.5 million in cash, just so you can meet your obligations and pay your employees. So it's a very serious situation you're in. Last week, and we're going to do a district comparison right now. Last week, our HR director, or our HR assistant superintendent, Tony Smith, came and presented superintendent search services to you. And in her presentation, she helped you establish a salary range for a prospective superintendent. So when she did that, she brought you 5 district examples with similar ADA and enrollment to your district so that you could establish that salary range in comparison to similar districts. So what I did was I took those same exact 5 districts, Arvin Elementary, Patchka Unified, Richland Elementary, Lamont Elementary, and McFarland Unified, and I pulled together some financial information from them to share with you so that you can compare the situation you're in to 5 similar districts in the county. So as you can see, the most telling thing will be the total reserve column when we get to that. But across the top, I've listed 4 funds. Your Fund 01 is your general fund. That's the fund that you operate most of your business out of. The second fund is Fund 17. That is a fund that supports the general fund. Districts use that to set aside money for special things, special purchases that they feel like they need to save for in the future. So that might be a textbook adoption, it might be a bus purchase, it could be some work you need to do on a school, or it could be equipment you need to buy, something like that. So districts will take general fund money and set it aside in 17 and assign a specific purpose to it. The third fund, Fund 20, is your post-employment benefit reserve fund. That is where you will set money aside for future benefits that you'll have to pay for your retired employees. And then the fourth fund, Fund 40, is a special reserve for capital outlay. Again, you can set money aside there for projects, set money aside there to support a bond measure, lots of uses there. Those 3 funds do not have a funding stream of their own. No money flows into them unless the board transfers it from the general fund, Fund 01. Now, it takes board action to do that, and as you can see, these 5 districts at different times have transferred money into those other funds. They've set aside money for different purposes that suit their district. And at this time, your district has no funds available there. Now, the flip side of that, and the reason I'm pointing it out, is it does play into your total reserves. And if you have taken, you could also take action to move it back to the general fund. So when I'm reviewing a district's fiscal health, I will look at all 4 of these funds to evaluate the fiscal health of the district. So let's look at Arvin's general fund, Fund 01. You know, they have a small ending fund balance projected there, but you can see they have several other funds with money in it that gives their fiscal health picture a much brighter picture than it would be if we were just looking at the general fund. They have $8.2 million available. Tehachapi, 8.5. Richland, 17.1 million. Lamont, 18.5. And McFarland, a very robust $24.6 million. These are similar districts to you in Kern County, and they're what I would say are very fiscally healthy. And then, as I said, you can compare yourself to that. So that's why, again, we're trying to point out the urgency of your situation. Now, the last column is your salary and benefit ratio to total expense. And what that is a ratio between what you're paying in salary and benefits versus what your total expenses are in the general fund. As you can see, most of these districts have a lower ratio than you. And I want to point out that the 90.3% that you're at is the highest ratio in Kern County. It's not just the highest ratio on that diagram, it's the highest of the 47 school districts in the county. So you're paying more in salary and benefits as compared to all expenses than any other county, in any other school district in our county. So that's very important to look at, especially when you see McFarland at 77.3, Lamont at 78.8, significantly lower at a comparable district. Okay, and one other thing I want to add, the majority of the districts in the state fall within the 80 to 85% range. And that's the range we would like to see you get back to, and it's going to take some work. So then let's talk about reserves, because we've talked about the fact that you're negative 3.9 million, you need about 1.3 million to get to the 5.2 that we were talking about in previous meetings. But that's the minimum reserve, 3%. When we talk about minimum reserves, that's what the state requires for you to certify positive, but it's not what we would recommend to your district. And you can see those other districts that are comparable to you have significantly more in reserves than a 3%. School Services of California is the most prominent fiscal advisory consulting firm in California for public education, and they recommend a 17% reserve. The average unified district in California is at 16.6. A 17% reserve for your district would be 6.9 million. You can see that's even still lower than any of the 5 districts we just looked at, who are all over 8 million. So then as we move on to why more than the minimum will really serve the district well, LCFF growth has slowed. And not only has it slowed because it's fully funded now, and so we're only seeing COLA increases, it's going to slow in your district because it's paid on an per ADA basis, and your ADA is not growing now. In addition to that, the COLAs that we're going to see are going to range between 2.7 and 3.9%, and that's if the economy continues to grow or at least stay consistent. There are reasons for us to believe that's not going to happen, and we'll talk about that a little bit more also. In addition to that, existing staff is going to continue to advance on your salary schedules. So even though you're reducing staff and you're not offering raises, you still have staff that will advance on your step and column salary schedules. So you are going to see increases to existing staff. In addition to that, we have significant district paid pension rates that are growing. They're doubling over a 5-year period. So you're going to pay much more for STRS and PERS benefits for your employees. We're in the 3rd year of a 5-year period. By the end of that 5 years, they're basically doubling. So that's an increased expense to the district. And then on top of that, health benefits range from 2 to 4% increase every year, so you're going to have to deal with that. Minimum wage is increasing in the state of California, and as it comes up to the bottom of your classified salary schedules, you'll have to address that. It's an incremental increase, but it will probably at some point cause you to adjust your salary schedules for classified. Next, I want to point out something that I heard multiple times last week during public comment. Your community wants a long-term solution. The minimum reserve rate is not a long-term solution for your district. It does not allow you any wiggle room to overcome any unforeseen circumstance that might arise. You need to have reserves that will allow you to address something you didn't see coming, and 3% will not give you that. It'll get you to a positive certification, it'll get Jamie and I out of here, but it will not set you up for long-term health, and we could be back here a year, 2 years later. Lastly, we have to consider the possibility for economic recession. Right now, we're in an expansion and recovery from the Great Recession we all experienced, which was the it's the worst economic situation the country's faced since the Great Depression. We have been in that expansion long term, and I'm going to advance to the next slide. and start with some information about recessions. So economists cannot predict when a recession is going to happen. They can only identify it once it has started and once we're in the midst of it. So right now, economists foresee a recession coming because we've been in a long recovery, but they can't tell you exactly when it's going to happen. What happens, with the economy is it's cyclical. We go from expansion to recession, back to expansion, back to recession. We know that's going to happen as well. We know all expansion periods, which we are in one, end with a recession at some point, and the average expansion period lasts 40 months, which is, roughly over 3 years. So the next slide, the current expansion period we are in is approaching a record. It's the second longest in U.S. history. We're at 115 months now. The record in the United States since 1854 is 120 months. If you look at our multi-year projection, it's going to take, we're talking about the current year plus 2 subsequent years. That's a 36-month period. Right now we're 7 months into our MYP, so we have 29 months to go. So you add 29 months to that, 115 months. We do not expect to continue to be in an expansion period for 144 months. It would break the record by 2 years. So we have to predict or expect or plan for a recession to occur before we get to 2021, which means, again, while we're in a good economic situation, we need to build our reserves. We need to make adequate cuts to do that. So what happens, what's the effects on the state budget of a recession? There's loss of state tax revenue. So there are 3 funding streams for state tax revenue. There's state income tax, there's state sales tax, and there's capital gains tax. If there's a recession, unemployment goes up, people aren't working, state income tax declines. Also, state sales tax will decline because people aren't working and they're not spending money, or they're holding on to it because they're trying to overcome whatever in front of them fiscally. And then lastly, with capital gains, that is tax on investment gains. But typically in a recession, the stock market declines and people aren't making money investing. So there's taxes on investments goes down. So all 3 of the main funding streams in California are affected. What does that do to public education? Well, we are 60% of the state's budget. So the state's total budget, public education makes up 60% of it. When they have to cut, they come to us. So we have to expect to experience cuts should a recession occur. Now, in addition to that, when a recession happens and the state's revenues are slowing or declining, they go through what you're going through and they have cash flow problems. So you're cash insolvent, the state becomes has cash shortages. So I want to show you a diagram from the 2010-11 period when the state was deferring cash payments to districts. So this diagram, if we start at the top, it's going to show you LCFF state aid apportionments on a monthly basis, and it's going to show you how they were deferred over the course of 2010 and 11. So the first deferral was February, and they deferred your February payment to July. Then they deferred, they paid your March, but then they deferred April, May, and June, 3 months in a row into the next fiscal year. So April went to August, May went to August, June went to July. To pay that June payment in July, they took your July payment to September. They took October to November, and March of the next year went to April, and they continued the same deferrals that you see at the top as it lists them as permanent deferrals. So basically the state kicked the can down the road, took their cash flow issues, and passed them on to school districts. Now, right now, you're having trouble making payroll. We've already established that multiple months we have to loan you money. If deferrals were going on, your cash situation would be so bad that our office could not meet the needs of your district, and you would go into state receivership. So again, before we get into a recession period, we have to build your reserves back up to a point where you can overcome the worst situation possible that might arise. Again, recessions sometimes are mild, Sometimes they're severe, as they were 10 years ago. We can't predict how bad it's going to be, but we can predict at some point we're going to be in one again, and we'd like to get you healthy before we get there. So the projected results from this reduction in force. I took your multi-year projection from first interim, and I removed the staff reductions that were in there present, as I said, they weren't adequate. And then I plugged in the ones that we're proposing to you tonight, that were proposed to you 2 weeks ago, that we feel must be done. Okay, these changes to the reduction in force project you to finish next year with a negative $380,000 fund balance. And they get you to 2021 with a positive $3.6 million ending fund balance. You are out of a negative certification, you're back in control of your district, you're positive, and you have a 6% reserve instead of a 3% reserve. That's still not a 17% reserve, you know, but it's a start. It also takes you to an 81% salary and benefit ratio to all expenses. Takes that 90% down to a much more healthy level. So what would we recommend you do at that point, or at this point? Approve the reduction in force as it's presented, maintain your salary and benefit ratio at the state average between 80 and 85%, and restore your reserves to a recession-proof level. Not only build them to 3.6 million, but build them up to the level of those 5 districts you saw who we deem as fiscally healthy. That's what we're here to recommend to you tonight. And to add to that, we know you're in a difficult situation. And up to this point, your district leadership has worked very well with us. They've complied with all of our requests. We've worked well together. We know that when this RIF was worked on, the site administrators were involved. You know, the staff really tried to involve as many people as possible to come to the conclusion of the levels they came to. And so we strongly recommend it. We expect you to approve it. If you don't, it gives us the impression that you're no longer willing to work with us. And then that puts us in a position of considering all other avenues or options, up to and including state receivership, which is not where we want to go. We want to continue to work with you guys. Jamie and I want to continue to support you. We want you to allow us to support you from a cash perspective until you're back on your feet. We see a light at the end of the tunnel here. And again, we strongly recommend that you approve the action in front of you tonight. Thank you. Any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
At this time, I've got 2 requests for the speaker. Great.
So I'm here to talk about Resolution 18-1910, reducing basically the RIF and specifically about certain programs that the school district has brought about and I think is vital in its future. I will try to tie as much of it as I can into the financial report that was just given because I thought it was very enlightening. But let me go ahead and just breeze through this really fast. So SKIPA began in 2017-2018 year with 2 students. They increased to 28 with 1 full-time equivalent employee, so it's about a 28-to-1 ratio. This year they bought additional licenses, went from 26 students to 52 students with 2 full-time equivalent teachers, guaranteeing a 26-to-1 ratio. The ADA, which some of you may not understand or know, is can achieve up to 100% ADA per day, per student. In the past where we've been talking about independent study only receiving 75%, that's completely incorrect. Those are numbers that were based off of the ALIS, historical averages, and so it was assumed that all independent study would just receive 75%. So I want to make sure that that's very clear. Right now, SKIPA probably has, has the highest ADA at 98%, borderlining 99% every once in a while. To kind of put that in perspective, I'll jump forward really fast. You have other sites, such as RHS, which is about 95%, TMS about 95.5%, West Park at about 96.5%, and Rosamond Elementary at about 94%. So this is much higher than the 92% that we were dealing with last year, which means that our entire ADA has increased. And so I'm still a little bit baffled about these numbers saying where our ADA is still flatlined. We've increased 3%. That's a significant chunk of change. So if we had a $40 million revenue last year, shouldn't we expect that we'd have more than $40 million this year? These are just some questions that maybe you might be able to help us answer. But back to the program at hand, SKIPA, Ed Code 51745 has 3 restrictions on the type of people that can be involved in this and how many you can actually have in that type of independent study program. No more than 10% of people's that are in opportunity school programs or continuing high schools shall be eligible. Individuals with exceptional needs shall not participate in independent study unless his or her IP specifically provides for it, and then temporarily disabled people shall not receive individual instruction. So there really is no limitation on SKIPA whatsoever. In fact, there are even awards provided by CDE and its sister organization, California Consortium of Independent Study, called the Exemplary Independent Study Recognition Award. You can't even apply for this award unless 75% of your population is independent study. Therefore, this whole 10% limitation that we've been thinking about is completely incorrect. And I'm trying to bring these points to light because these are the types of programs, I'll wrap it up, these are the type of programs that give the flexibility to students and the incentive for teachers to invest in their children. To be able to say that I can guarantee that this teacher right here is going to have 25 butts in their seats every single class is far better than a teacher where we might have 30 in one class, 6 in the next, 15 in third period, 20, it's all over the map in traditional. I think that this is a program that we really should look at, and even though we have these cuts that we have to make, I would hope that you consider making the right cuts and keeping the right programs here. So obviously we need to overcome our budgetary issues, but number one, we need to know exactly how much money we are under as opposed to just guessing. And then number two, when we do make those cuts, I hope that you've been working with Mr. Qualman and the others to really identify the programs that will help bring money to the school district so that we're not losing kids. Because if we continue to cut the programs that are attracting people here, you're going to have to go through this whole round of cuts again next year when we have less children in our school district. Because once again, we will not have met that reduction that the county wants to see. So thank you for your time.
Good evening. I want to thank Mr. Henderson and Mr. Payne for providing us with a lot of good information. Some of the information, much of the information I've got, some of the information I don't. It's always helpful to have a full picture as we talk about things. It's unfortunate that RTA doesn't have the ability to work directly with the county, that we have to work with the district and then the district works with the county. And RTA feels closed out from having a lot of these discussions. And so trying to go through channels to put together a solution is very, very difficult, especially when RTA is experienced in being through these processes before. Surprisingly, I'm very much a fiscal conservative. I'm very careful with my own money. I think the district needs to be very careful with its money. 4 or 5 years ago when we negotiated the current contract we are in, the district was at probably a 10, 12, or 14% reserve. And our negotiations and our contract were based on that. It's unfortunate that the projections and the fiscal programs put into place didn't support what was put into place through negotiations, which was locked in and everybody knew what it would be, but then other things occurred to cause this situation that we're in. I'm just a middle school math teacher, so I do very simple math. It looks to me that if we were to cut $2 million in personnel from our budget, right now it's at 90%, which would be roughly $36 million out of the 40. If we cut $2 million out of that through personnel, it lowers that to $34 million going to that, and it reduces the 90% towards salary and benefits ratio to 85%. RTA would propose that we approach this problem in 2 steps. One step this year, see what we can do, see where we can get, and take another step next year if necessary, if we can ever get into a position where the district can actually negotiate with RTA. But unfortunately, we're not in that position right now. I want to thank the board for tabling the resolution last week. I thought that was a good decision for you to get more of this information and also for you to make a more informed decision. RTA definitely encourages you to approve a RIF resolution in some form tonight. It needs to be approved in some form tonight because we do, as Mr. Gutierrez said, we have very serious timelines that we need to make. RTA is ready to work with the district and help make those timelines if we're allowed to meet with the people in the district to look at those personnel decisions that have to happen. So just kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Gregg was saying and some other things that you heard last week, we'd like to see a modified RIF resolution. The Southern Kern Prep Academy should be maintained, just moving that from its current environment to Abraham Lincoln. Still requires the same number of, oh boy, I knew I was going to fall short of my 3 minutes. Is going to fall short in terms of the program. That program will die away. It won't serve the students the way it is now, and if we just move it from one location to another, is it really a savings? We also are very much in favor of keeping the phys ed program at the elementary schools. We heard last week from our most senior teacher and somebody I get to see every night as well about how the physical ed program in elementary not only improves the health of students but improves their ADA, which brings in more money for the students. We would like to keep the CTE media program at the high school because digital media is definitely the future for a ton of our students and they need it for college and career. The ROTC is still on this RIF list, although the information I had was that we've worked out a program with the Air Force to keep that. And then lastly, what is on this list, I was confused because we had 6 SDC teachers on the last RIF resolution from Ascend Academy, and that's been readjusted to 3 positions, which I think I understand why that happened. I just wish I could get the information before these things change so that the people that I represent, when they come to me with questions, I'm able to answer those questions. But again, I think the board definitely needs to approve a RIF resolution tonight, but in some form. You can change this resolution and we can work on it over the next 2 years. Thank you very much.
I make a motion to approve the resolution 18-19-10, reducing and eliminating certain participated services for 2019-2020.
Can I say something? Yeah. Okay, so again, the ROTC teacher, what's going on with that? Because there was something saying it was extended.
Okay. Let me do a little bit of explanation. We want to approve this resolution, which allows us to do the RIFs. When we actually do the RIFs, that will probably come off because we got the okay to keep it. But we need to get this in its form, okay, so they can make the necessary notifications. There will be some changes before the end of the year on the amount of RIFs and the programs that will actually be cut. But we need to at least get this done. I mean, this doesn't say that everybody that's on that list is going to be totally gone. It'll all depend on if we have butts in the seat If you don't have a constant seat, it doesn't make any sense to have a teacher in anyways. And
That ROTC instructor, his notice can be rescinded
Right,
between now and May.
Okay.
So though he's on the list and you're approving the list, his can be rescinded at the proper time.
My concern was just about the PE teachers, because I understand the ability to rehire people back after they've gotten a notice. It's just that they touch every single student at a school. And PE is part of the curriculum. You know, to cut it as if it's not important. And it does get kids to school, especially at Rosamond Elementary.
And it's our understanding that you're not cutting PE. And you're reducing staff, but PE will continue to be taught. Is that correct, Leanne?
yes.
Yeah.
So that's what my goal was about.
PE is the only subject in the Ed Code that has a minutes requirement, 200 minutes a week. Maybe different at the high school, I'm not sure, but for K-8, the 200 minutes is in there.
It will not be taught, and it will not be done in the same effective manner as it is without those dedicated teachers.
Right.
There's no way a classroom teacher can do it in the same manner as a dedicated PE teacher.
You know, last week, when I voted to table it, I had two concerns. And I went the very next day and talked about them concerns that we had. One was the PE teacher. I had a real big concern about that. I listened to the side of the teachers. It gives them an extra 20 minutes a day to prepare. That's basically what I was being told, somewhere around there. Which is, I understand that's really nice, but I also understood that there's going to be a time where we can, as teachers, administrations, can come together and negotiate these things. And I believe that's a good time when we can sit down and really put our words to action. When we say we're here for the students, let's see then if we're really here for the students. When we go into negotiations, I strongly believe, and I believe we're going to have a PE teacher if I have something to say about it. But let's see when we enter into negotiations, and let's see what the outcome is there.
We tried to negotiate elementary PE teachers for 20 years, and the answer was no, 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 no. Once they're gone, they won't come back.
Well, let's give it one more try, please. I encourage you, let's give it one more try, and let's see what happens.
And the reason why I'm motion is only because I don't want to see our district get into the state, overtaken by the state. We need to make these cuts at this resolution now, and we can always bring back as enrollment grows or increases. You know, I know it hurts, but it's just a step we gotta take. And I just feel that we have to trust the county office to lead us and get us out of this mess. You know, they're lending us the money, helping us pay, payroll. I mean, what about that? I mean, it's just, I know it hurts, but we just gotta do it. It's something we have to do.
The most important thing is to make sure that every class is full. We can't have teachers with 6 kids in their class. We have to make sure every single class is full of kids and that we're getting paid money for that teacher to teach those kids. Because we can't afford to just pay them to do nothing. And so that is the way to make up this budget shortfall, is to just fill up those classes. And if they aren't full, then we can't have them.
You guys thought the program you're taking away, people are already talking about it. So how is that going to help us? I just don't see it. The hubbub out there already is.
Well, I have the first, and I will in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5 ayes. Motion passes. Decision of possible action for resolution 181911, approved classified administration layoffs. I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Second by Sanchez. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I heard 5 ayes. Motion passes. So you want to be adjourned?
I move that we adjourn.
Motion by Robinson, second by Brants. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you for coming.